I'm Pastor Theron. Welcome to Church Where You Are and your Wednesday Bible study. Before I get started, I'd like to say a special word of thanks to friends and family who've been watching these videos, and a word of welcome to you, especially if you're just joining us. If you like what I'm doing here on YouTube, I hope that you will consider subscribing. Watch the videos, like them, leave comments, share them with other people. Hit the notification bell so you know when I upload a new video. I appreciate all your support. Our passage today comes from Matthew chapter 8 and also Luke chapter 7. This is the story of Jesus healing the centurion's servant. So in Matthew chapter 8, I'll be reading from the New International Version. I hope that you follow along in whatever version that you like best, in a book or on your phone, or however you like to do it. And it goes like this. When Jesus entered Capernaum, a centurion came to him asking for help. "Lord," he said, "my servant lies at home, paralyzed and in terrible suffering." Jesus said to him, "I will go and heal him." The centurion replied, "Lord, I do not deserve to have you come under my roof, but just say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I myself am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. I tell this one, go, and he goes, and that one to come, and he comes. And I say to my servant, do this, and he does it." And when Jesus heard this, he was astonished, and said to those following him, "I tell you the truth, I have not found anyone in Israel with such great faith. I say to you that many will come from the east and the west, and will take their places at the feast with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the subjects of the kingdom will be thrown outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." Then Jesus said to the centurion, "Go, and it will be done just as you believed it would." And his servant was healed at that very hour. And then in Luke chapter 7, another version of the same story, I like to read all the different versions from all the different accounts. That way we get a better understanding of the whole story. And in Luke chapter 7, the story is a little different in that the centurion sends people out for him. When Jesus had finished saying all this, in the hearing of the people, he entered Capernaum. And there a centurion's servant whom his master highly valued was sick and about to die. The centurion heard of Jesus and sent some elders of the Jews to him, asking him to come and heal his servant. And when they came to Jesus, they pleaded earnestly with him, "This man deserves to have you do this, because he loves our nation and has built our synagogue." So Jesus went with them. He was not far from the house when the centurion sent friends to say to him, "Lord, don't trouble yourself, for I do not deserve to have you come under my roof. That is why I did not even consider myself worthy to come to you. But say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I myself am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. I tell this one, go, and he goes, and that one to come, and he comes. And I say to my servant, do this, and he does it." And when Jesus heard this, he was amazed at him, and turning to the crowds following him, he said, "I tell you, I have not found such great faith even in Israel." Then the men who had been sent returned to the house and found the servant well. And turning back to Matthew chapter 8, this is a story of another healing miracle that Jesus performed. Jesus performed three types of miracles: healing, miracles over nature, and miracles over death. And so this is a miracle that shows Jesus healing. But it's interesting in the fact that he doesn't actually go to the sick person. And that's, to me, what the story is all about. So let me set the stage. So Jesus often spends time out by himself in quiet places. He's gaining some fame and some notoriety. He has a hard time just moving about without a large crowd following him, and he likes to be alone sometimes. And so he is now returning in to the town of Capernaum. This is up on the Sea of Galilee. This is probably Peter's hometown, where Peter had his fishing business. And from previous videos, you might remember that Jesus often stayed at Peter's house as sort of his home base, home away from home, I guess you could call it. And so here he is returning into or back towards Capernaum when in the Matthew account, at least, the centurion comes out to meet Jesus. Now, the centurion is the person of most note throughout this story, other than Jesus, of course, and the servant is the one to be healed. But the centurion is a Roman. Israel in these days is under Roman occupation, and the Romans, by and large, are hated by the Jewish nationals and all of the area because Rome is inflicting punishment against the people. They are upholding a harsh rule, and here this Roman centurion represents all that. If you dig into the word a little bit further, the word centurion has the prefix centa in it, the CNTE, like we would look for in a centimeter, or from the old Latin root centum, meaning 100. So a centurion is a leader of 100 soldiers. If you're a veteran, you might look at it like this man is a platoon leader or something. In the old days, I remember in basic training, there was 80 of us in my platoon in basic training, and we had leadership over us, including an officer who was in charge of everything, though the sergeants did the work of training us. And so here you have the centurion, the commander over the 100 troops. And my way of thinking is that Capernaum is a small, sort of a backwater town, and it wouldn't have taken a whole lot to command it and to maintain authority and peace within it. So this 100 soldiers, this detachment or platoon of soldiers with their leader in charge, he may have been the senior most person in charge, the authority figure in the town of Capernaum. And so that sets the light a little differently on this man. He is a man of authority, but anyone who's ever served in the military, and if you've ever been subordinate to others above you but had people beneath you, so to speak, he recognizes that not only is a man of authority, but he's under authority. But his position puts him in a difficult place, I guess, because he has to accept the position that he is in, both in authority but also in need of help. And so in the Matthew account, Jesus is coming into Capernaum, and a centurion comes out to meet him. He says, "Lord, my servant lies at home, paralyzed and in terrible suffering." So the next person we'll take a look at is this servant. In the Greek, the word servant is usually doulos, D-U-O-L-O-S, doulos. But in this case, it's not doulos in the Greek. The word is pais, P-A-I-S, pais, which means like a boy or a son. And so it's really the better idea here is this is his servant boy. And so this would have been the one that he sent to run errands, or the one that he sent messages to other people. This is a servant boy. So Jesus is coming into Capernaum, and there's a centurion who comes out to meet him and asking for help. He says, "Lord, my servant boy lies at home, paralyzed and in terrible suffering." We don't know the circumstances by which this servant boy came to be injured or paralyzed, or how it happened, or when. But the fact of the matter is that this centurion valued this servant greatly. And in the Luke account, those words are used, that the centurion valued his servant greatly. And the delegation that he sent out to talk to Jesus were the Jews of the town. And their argument is, this man supports our nation. He isn't holding us under this harsh rule like others. He kind of thinks the way we think. He even authorized us to build a synagogue, or what it says in Luke is that he built a synagogue. Well, he authorized it. He wouldn't have done it himself. He would have signed off on it and allowed them to build a synagogue. And so we begin to get a picture of this centurion, of this man, and his outlook on life, and his outlook on himself, and his position within the world and within the military. And so we find him in quite a predicament. In verse 7, Jesus has been told about the servant and the centurion, and by the centurion, and Jesus says, okay, I will go and heal him. Now, I want you to notice that Jesus doesn't say, I'll go and see him. Jesus says, I'll go and heal him. It's just right. It's just immediate. Jesus doesn't say, let me see what I can do. You're a Roman, you've been oppressing us forever. We're tired of it, and now you come to me asking for help. He doesn't lord it over him like that at all. In fact, Jesus immediately says, let me go see what I can do. Let me go and heal him. Let me come and heal him. And the word I there, I will go, I is emphatic. And what that means is that Jesus says, I myself. I'm not going to send someone. I'm going to go and do it. I myself will go and heal him. The story begins to shift right here because the centurion begins to have an idea of what's about to happen. Jesus is going to make his way to the centurion's house. Well, to understand this completely, you have to understand that the Roman in this case, the centurion in this case, is not a Jewish citizen. He is not Jewish. He is a Gentile. And for a Jew, like Jesus is here, Jesus is a Jew, that for a Jew to go into a Gentile's house would make him unclean. And Jesus is willing to do that. In the passage before, Jesus has healed a leper. He was willing to even touch this leper to make him clean. Well, a leper is unclean, regardless of nationality, regardless of religion. And so Jesus has already crossed these boundaries, being willing to do it. Not only is he willing to heal someone of the Jewish nation who is leprous, but he is willing to heal someone of the Gentile nation, even someone under the Roman authority. Jesus is willing. He's willing to break these ties with the powers that be. He's willing to break the ties of the authority that the Jewish elite class has over the land and over the people. He's willing to break ties with this idea that only the Jewish people are the ones who will make it to heaven. He is willing to heal this leper. He's willing to go into this Gentile's house and heal this servant. He is willing to perform miracles. He is willing to do the work that he did upon the earth. He is willing to go all the way to the cross and ultimately sacrifice his life and die that you and I might find forgiveness and redemption for our sin. Jesus is willing. In verse 8, the centurion replies, Lord, I do not deserve to have you come under my roof. Well, the fact of the matter is that none of us deserve Jesus to come into our lives. None of us deserve Jesus to come into our hearts. He offers it freely and willingly that we can accept it, that we can accept the free gift of grace that he offers to us for redemption of sin. What the centurion is saying is, I am not worthy. In fact, in the Greek, it's the same words that John speaks in John chapter 1, where he says, one comes after me whose sandals I am not worthy to untie. I am not worthy. I am not fit. I am not worthy to have you come into my house, to come under my roof. The problem is that in this case, many people, even in the time of the story is taking place, and even in our modern time, some people think that they are entitled to and are going to receive something simply by the way they were, because of where they were born, because of when they were born, because of where they were born, because of who they their last name is, who their nationality is, or whatever. But that is not the case. We are not entitled to these things. We are not entitled to the free gift of grace. Jesus offers it to us out of his benevolence and out of the love that God has for the people, for you and for me. Jesus said, the centurion says, Lord, I do not deserve to have you come under my roof, but just say the word. Just say the word, and my servant will be healed. This centurion is a man of authority, but he's also a man under authority. He has his leadership, and then he is in leadership over his soldiers. He finds himself in a very strange predicament. I can identify with this guy. I think what he's actually saying is, my men obey my commands. Certainly, this paralysis, this illness, this cause of pain and problem for my servant will obey a command from you. I tell one to go and he goes. I tell one to come and he comes. I tell them to do this and they do it. Speak the word and it's done, is what he's saying. But the centurion, as a man of authority and probably the ruling authority of the town and of the area, is now coming to ask for help from one of his very own subjects of the authority that he is over. This must have put him in a very strange circumstance, and I can identify with that. Let me tell you why. I am a retired Army captain. I started out as an E1, which is the lowest rank possible in all of the military, E1. I didn't wear any rank on my collars. In fact, when I got to my duty station, Fort Riley, Kansas, with the 1st Infantry Division, I went in to meet the commandant, and he said, "Now, soldier, where's your rank?" I said, "I'm wearing it, sir." He said, "You're an E1?" I said, "I really am." He said, I don't know that I've ever seen one. In those days, people were being promoted to E2 just for joining. Somehow I got skipped over. I started at the absolute lowest possible point in E1, meaning enlisted, level 1, and I made rank through the years all the way up to E5 sergeant before I got commissioned and became an officer. I was a second lieutenant and then a first lieutenant, and then I was in long enough to make captain and actually retired as a captain. So as an officer, as a captain, I had some measure of authority. As a sergeant, I had some measure of authority, but I always had people over me. So I can identify with this guy as a man of authority, but still under authority. The other thing that I find really strange is that this requires a great deal of contemplation on the part of the centurion, because he is asking one of his subjects, the very person in this case, Jesus, that he has the authority over, to command and say, "Speak the word and my servant is healed. I demand it of you." He didn't do that. He seems to recognize Jesus' leadership being above his. And so he takes his position and he sets it aside for a moment and recognizes his need that comes from Jesus. Jesus now has the position of authority in the comparison, if you will, and the commander, the centurion, is now asking for help from his own subject. If you will simply speak the word. This speaks to the centurion's humility. But Jesus didn't remark of the centurion's humility. He remarked of his faith. He said, "I do not deserve to have you come under my roof. Just say the word and my servant will be healed. For I myself am a man under authority with soldiers under me. I tell this one to go and he goes. I tell that one to come and he comes. I tell this one to do this and he does it." And when Jesus heard this, he was astonished, and he said to those following him, "I tell you the truth, I have not found anyone in Israel So in all of Israel, all the people that Jesus has interacted with and all the healing experiences and miracles he has performed, he is even in Israel where the people are anticipating the coming of Messiah, even where the people have this direct connection with God and the temple and the synagogues and the connection with the priests who intercede and all of this, the history of Israel. In all of Israel, Jesus says, I have not found anyone with such great faith. I say to you that many will come from the east and from the west and take their place at the feast with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. And I think that's something of a foreshadowing, because what Jesus is saying is outside of the kingdom of Israel, outside of the area, the land, the state of Israel, the nation of Israel, outside to the east. What's east of Israel? Well, you have Syria, you have Iran and Iraq, you have the lands of the Muslims. East of Israel, people will be invited to the table. What do you have to the west of Israel? Well, that's the land that Paul would go on missionary journeys one after another to, into the land of the Gentiles and the barbarians, and even further than that to seek out anyone who would call upon the name of the Lord. When God seemed to open up the gospel to the Gentiles to the west of Israel. I think this is a foreshadowing of Paul's missionary work and the missionary work that's even happening today in the lands east of Israel that have always been very hostile to the gospel message. People are beginning to respond. It's the most amazing thing I've even heard of. But Jesus says, I tell you the truth, I have not found anyone in Israel with such great faith. I say to you that many will come from the east and from the west and take their place at the feast in the kingdom of heaven. But the subjects of the kingdom, oh my, the subjects of the kingdom, the Jews themselves, is what he is saying. Some of them are not going to make it. Some of them are not going to make it to the feast. They seem to have this idea of an entitlement, of an elitist mentality, that somehow they just deserve it, that they should be entitled to it. And Jesus is saying that is not the case, because it's not based upon where you were born. It's not based upon what your last name is. It's not based upon where you go to church. It's not based upon what nation you're part of. It's based upon a relationship that you have with Christ. It's a relationship that you have with God through Christ. It's a relationship that is based upon the faith that you have in the one who came to redeem us all. It is a matter of acceptance, and the Gentiles and the barbarians would go on to accept it, and that is why you and I are here, because the gospel was spread and accepted by people before us. Jesus goes on to say, but the subjects of the kingdom will be thrown outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And then Jesus said to the centurion, go. You can go. Same thing the centurion says to those under his command. You can go. Or I want you to come here. Or go do this. Jesus says to him, go. It will be done just as you believed it would. And his servant was healed at that very hour. All the centurion needed was a word. All the centurion needed to know was the command had been given, the order had been given, the instruction had been given by Jesus himself, and that's all he needed. He is so sure that when he gives a command, when the centurion gives a command, that the task is completed. That when Jesus gives the command, when Jesus gives the word, the task is completed. Because he humbled himself and he showed his faith in the one who came to heal. He commands by, the centurion commands by words, and Jesus also commands by words. He creates by words. The world was spoke. The universe was spoke. Light and darkness was spoke. Water and dry ground and all the living creatures and animals and birds of the air were spoke into existence. His faith allowed him to believe that Jesus' word was enough. Is it enough for you? If God gave you a word, would you follow it? If the Spirit gave you an order, would you obey it? If Jesus gave you instructions, would you heed them? God has spoken words in our lives. God has ordered us to certain tasks as believers, to share our faith, to live out our faith, to be kind, to be compassionate, to be loving, to live out the fruit of the Spirit. If God gave you a command, would you follow it? Because God has spoken a word in our lives. God has spoken a word in your life, and it will be so. So you can trust it, you can believe it, because it comes from the one in true authority, the one over all, the high King of heaven, King of kings, the Lord of lords, God of all. Thanks for watching.